Olá, boa tarde a todos, muito obrigada pela presença. O Piano e Suas Perspectivas é um programa da Escola de Música e Artes Cênicas, Reitoria Digital da Universidade Federal de Goiás, Mississippi State Universrity e Universidade del Atlántico, com apoio da Fundação para a Ciência e Tecnologia de Portugal, Centro de Estudos de Sociologia e Estética Musical da Universidade Nova de Lisboa, Centro de Estudos Brasileiros, Rádio Universitária e Rádio Brasil Central FM. Fazem parte da equipe do programa Além de Mim, Pablo Lisboa, Rosângela Yasbeck Seba, Wesley de Menezes e Amira Nunes. Nossa proposta é levar a todos os interessados assuntos relacionados à importância da arte e seu papel na sociedade. Muito obrigada por todas as semanas estarem conosco. A entrevistadora de hoje será a doutora Rosângela Seba, chefe do Departamento de Piano da Escola de Música da Mississippi State Universrity. The Piano and its Perspectives, it's a program of the School of Music and Performing Arts Digital Department of the Federal University of Goiás, Universidad del Atlántico, and the Mississippi State University, with support from the Foundation for Science and Technology of Portugal, Center for Studies in Sociology and Musical Aesthetics of the New University of Lisbon, Center for Brazilian Studies, Radio Universitária, and Radio Brasil Central FM. Besides me, Pablo Lisboa, Rosângela Yasbeck Seba, Wesley de Menezes, and Amira Nunes are part of the program's team. Our proposal is to bring to all those interested issues related to the importance of music and its role in society. The interview today will be Dr. Rosângela Seba, head of the piano department, the Mississippi State University.
Good afternoon and good evening to Brazil and Europe. We have here Dr. Pinkas, and I'm happy that she accepted our invitation. Let me talk about a little bit of Dr. Pinkas. She is an Israeli-born pianist, and she's now currently a professor of music at Dartmouth Music Department. And she also has performed in Europe, extensively in Europe, United States, and South America. She has several CDs coming up, and some is recorded by MSR and Shostakovich and music from Manila. And we're going to talk to her about music in general. Welcome to the Piano in its Perspectives.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for accepting the invitation. We have talked a little bit before the interview, and we are going to put some of your videos later. But I would like to start from the beginning. How did you learn music, and who were your first professors?
I think my first unintended professor was my kindergarten teacher, because my first exposure was when I was 5, and in the first day at kindergarten, she sat down and she played, and what it turned out to be the écossaise from Beethoven, ta-da-dum, ta-da-dum, ta-da-dum. And I thought it was the most amazing things, and I went home and I wanted piano lessons. But my parents said, wait until you read and write, and so on and so forth. So I started when I was 7. That was in Israel. And I was lucky to have amazing teachers, and I should honor them. My very first teacher was a fantastic woman who came from Poland, Genia Barniv. My second teacher 8 years later was of the Hungarian tradition, Ilona Vince. And I went on with Hungarian teachers because I studied with Shebok eventually in Indiana. And I think the two others that I should mention are Louis Voskirchen in the US and of course Russell Sherman. But back to the beginning. So I was just a kid wanting to study piano, and I had this curiosity, and one thing led to another. I also rebelled against it, but does that answer your question?
It does, and it seems familiar.
I'm sure.
Tell me more about the study of music in Israel. And I'm asking because it is a tradition in the United States that students are exposed to music in the public school system, and most of them are in band and choir. In Brazil, usually it's a private conservatory or a state or a federal conservatory. So we start when we are 6, 7, when we know how to write and read. And it starts with levels until you are in high school, and then you have to decide if you go to the undergrad or not. So tell me more about the education, music education in Israel.
So I should say that, of course, by now things might be a little different because I'm talking about quite a while ago. But in Israel, we had a very rudimentary music in elementary school, but not much. But since I was lucky enough to get lessons and my teacher recognized my curiosity, from the age of 9, I was going to what we call a conservatory. In Israel, a conservatory is where kids go after school, and it's private, of course, where kids go after school to start with theory and ear training. I was very lucky because I was doing all of that from a very young age. And of course, that is very important. So from the age of 9, every Tuesday afternoon, I would go to Conservatorium Ron and do the ear training. And then I was doing a bit of composition. And from age 12, I was actually studying composition. And for a while, I was debating whether I was going to be a composer or a pianist. But so that all of this music stuff happened outside of school. I mean, I went to school. I was a good student, so I went to a good high school. And in my time, they decided to recognize music as one of the matriculation topics for high school. So at the end of high school, I also went through an exam where I played an entire program of music. I went to Tel Aviv University to do that. But it sounds to me that this is more like the Brazilian system than it is like the American system. We never had an orchestra or a band in our school. So all of this was extracurricular. But I should say that the education when I was growing up was wonderful. I think I had a very good high school, and but all of this was extra basically, and I think that's probably still the case. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I understand, because that's the same in Brazil. So how did you transfer from Israel to United States? Is there any musical relationship? I know you were in this spring, you were in London. Am I correct?
Yes, but that's not connected, but that's another story. But this is a wonderful story, and it's an opportunity for me to pay homage to somebody to whom I owe being here. I turned out to be relatively talented, and so my parents were already thinking that they should send me abroad. They even sent me between my junior and senior year in high school. They sent me for the first time to Lucerne, and I played in Firkushni's masterclass, and that was a very strong impression for me, because I wasn't even sure I was good enough, and I kind of very diffidently said to him at the end of the masterclass, "Can you tell me whether I can be a pianist?" And anyway, to cut a long story short, when I was finishing high school, there was a professor of music from Brandeis University on sabbatical in Israel, and he was a wonderful violinist named Robert Koff, a founding member of the Juilliard Quartet. By that time, when I met him, he was the chair of the music department at Brandeis. My parents called him without my knowing. I got very upset, but then they arranged for me to go and play for him, and he arranged for me to get a full scholarship at Brandeis. And suddenly, at the age of 18, I haven't gone to university in the United States. I mean, in Israel. I had to get a temporary release from the army because I was supposed to go to the army. I get this invitation from Brandeis with full scholarship. I was extremely lucky, and he was my mentor and became my very, very dear friend, like a father. But I also ended up, like the very first couple of years I was playing with him. I was playing all the Beethoven sonatas with this first-class violinist. He was a very important friend and a very important person. I mean, an amazing musician. I'm still very much in touch with his family. But so that was my good luck, really, because my family never had any money, and I never, even in my wildest dreams, I didn't think I would go to the United States.
And then after that, you went to Indiana and then New England, and you do have a PhD in composition. Is that correct?
I do. And in a way, there's a funny story. I started it because I needed a visa, and I was in a big problem with the visa. And then I suddenly realized that this is really what I should do, because as a pianist, the thing that can really help you most is understanding structure and understanding because we play everything. We're not just playing a melody here and a melody there. I actually think everybody should have a PhD in composition. But that was the best thing that happened to me, because first of all, because I was a composer, I was thinking of music from the inside, building a piece. And this exposure to more deep thinking about structure was something that was ultimately a very important thing for me.
I think I spend more time with my students analyzing the music than really letting them play, because I think once you understand, the digital facility is not a big deal, but it's understanding and memorization too. It will help you memorize. So do you think that composition should be part of the curriculum as it is theory?
Yes, in fact, I think that theory really is the operative one. Unfortunately, I keep running into students who do not like theory, and they don't realize that it's like you read a play and you don't understand the grammar. Theory is grammar. Theory are the building blocks, and that's what you then take to the piece and understand how the piece is put together. I absolutely think that to be an educated musician, you have to have a grasp of it. But this is a whole other conversation in terms of what's happening to music education right now in terms of theory and. So it's really more, it's even more the theory than the composition. But I also, as a youngster, I was always very much exposed to contemporary music. I learned it side by side with Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven, to whom I'm also very connected. There was one continuum. So I was also curious. And you need to understand how music is put together in order to do that.
That's correct. That's correct. So how did you become a teacher? How was your change from finishing your degrees and then performing and composing, and now you are working as a professor?
So that was, I did not really intend to become a teacher. When I went to Indiana to do my master's, everybody that goes to Indiana becomes automatically a teacher. We taught beginning piano. I was doing that. Back at Brandeis, I was also teaching piano, teaching some theory workshop. And then I had to make a living. But I wasn't doing that much piano playing. But it was clear to me that I needed to at least start with an academic situation. Partly because of my visa situation, but also partly because I believe in the mission, and I fell into it. I don't think I was a very good teacher in those early years. I was very lucky to have gotten my position, the same position I'm in now, when I was in my 26, which is very young. The lack of it was that it was not a full time, so I always had time to devote to my own playing. My intention was to become the best pianist I could be. I fell into teaching. Now I think teaching is one of the best things that happened to me, because it forced me, and I'm sure you can relate to that, because we're pianists.
Yeah.
And then we find ourselves in a position where there are younger people, and there's something that we know and they don't know. Early on, I was trying to teach everything I knew in every lesson, and little by little I had to learn to do a little bit. And also, coming from an Israeli background, you Brazilians are much nicer than us Israelis. Now I'm not an Israeli anymore. I'm more American. But I had to learn to behave.
I hear the same thing. Well, I come from a Lebanese background, so
okay.
very strict education. So tell me more about the music that you are doing right now. You were in London for the spring, the entire spring. What were you doing there?
Okay, so in a way, the music that I'm doing now, you're talking back about my teaching role. So my normal teaching role is actually I'm only teaching piano, and as I said, I don't have to teach too much, so I have a good life in that regard. But my music department has what we call a foreign study program. We are on a quarter system, so each one of our quarters is about 10 weeks long. And every couple of years, we take a group of musicians to either London or to Vienna. And we rotate that leadership role. And the faculty that takes the group has to teach one course which is called Perspectives in Musical Performance, where we take them. I took them to about close to 40 concerts in the space of 10 weeks, which I choose. I curate a huge selection. So I had to teach that course. I wasn't teaching piano. Then I was coordinating, directing the rest of the program, because they take 2 other courses. Mm-hmm. So for me, those 10 weeks is when I actually, for a change, I put my pianist life a little bit on hold. Now, I should say, my pianist life, I very rarely go to concerts. I don't go to concerts. I need to protect my ears, but I more than make up for it When I go to London, I hear everything. And this year, we had a digital musician in the group. We had a jazz musician. We had a few people who were interested in more esoteric things. We had a harp player, a sax player, all these things. So we had an incredible plethora of events that we heard. And for 10 weeks, I was running around in London doing all these things. And it's a wonderful learning experience for me. But that's something that's rather unusual. But it was great.
That's a wonderful idea that your department is doing that in a rotation system, which allows students also to have different experience from different teachers in different places. Because that's the thing too, that we have to expose them to so many different perspectives of music in places as well. That's wonderful.
But I should add to this that the thing that kept me in my job all these years, which sometimes I laugh at the fact that I've been there for so long, is the fact that in concurrent to my teaching situation, I also from the beginning had an artist in resident position at the Hopkins Center, which is our performing arts center. So every year I had to present a number of I am presenting a number of concerts, to the extent that early on I used to present 2 solo recitals and 1 chamber, which now I think was madness. I mean, you have to change repertoire because you don't, and that really suits me because my big shtick is about learning music. I just love learning things. I don't like going back. But that's the thing, that the fact that I had to show my student that I can do what I'm trying to make them do. The fact that there is this symbiosis between my teaching and my playing, I think that was the thing that made this situation for me so wonderful. That's why I'm still doing it.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'd never learned when I was in Brazil, and I came here, I was 23 years old, it was, there's nowhere in Brazil that was taught sight reading. You know, you learn, and by mistake, you make a mistake, and then you learn. So it took a little longer for us to learn, but then we perfect really well. And when I came to the United States, all of a sudden my assistantships were accompanying people. You know, they put a music in front of you and you got to do it. And that's how I realized, oh my gosh, I lack on that. You know, in 6 months, 4 months, I had to improve tremendously because otherwise I would be kicked out of the program. So tell me more about, do you think this is sight reading skills is, I think, one of the most important things for a musician?
I am so glad you're bringing this up. It's fantastic that you're bringing this up. I mentioned it early that I had this curiosity. I'm the type of person that instead of perfecting the one page, I'm turning it over because I want to see what's on the other page. And my mom, who was not a professional musician, but was a very good musician, she used to yell at me from the kitchen, stick with your piece, stop reading. So this curiosity made me become a good reader, because my teacher used to complain that because of me, she always went to the library to get me new music. I was voracious. I had friends who were studying at the same age as me with different teachers, and they were doing what you were describing, which is the majority of what people do. They were working on 1 or 2 pieces. They were perfect, but they couldn't read. So I think I was just lucky that I had this curiosity and that my teacher indulged me. And I just learned to do it. I work a lot on this with many of my students. Some of my best students, they have an issue with this. And so to the best of my ability, I try to kind of stir them. There's certain things you tell people how to do, and I think people just have to do it. And of course, it's extremely important when you accompany or if you do any kind of collaborative thing, you have to be able to keep the time, whether you're playing the right notes or the wrong notes. And there is the thing that I coined to my students, the art of not playing the wrong note. In other words, it's better to not play something if you think it's going to be wrong, but be there on time. So yes, I think that's so important. I mean, and it's so under discussed. So I'm very glad. But you did it. You managed to do it.
Yeah, I realized I was lacking on it, and then I had to just improve. And improving is the matter of doing it.
Yes, doggedly, right? And just keep doing it.
Yes, and as you said, if you are playing something and you don't understand immediately, skip that, but keep the tempo going.
Oh my God, I still have to teach myself, stay away from the octaves, just play one line. You can't play all the notes. I mean, I had to play something with one of my students in London, a piece by Paul Creston for saxophone. I've never played anything more difficult in my life. Every chord
The
has about
sonata,
5.
right?
No, the Rhapsody, but it's very
Okay.
similar. I just had to learn how not to play those notes, because it takes you half an hour to read one chord. So sometimes it's just the ability to kind of like zero in on what's important, but it's so important to do this.
Yeah, the filter. You have to filter so fast to
Yeah.
know what to select to play.
So,
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, soprano and bass is a good way to do it.
yeah. As my teacher always said, top and bottom. That's that's the key for music. So how do you balance all this? Because it seems you seem really busy. How do you balance the teaching, the solo performance, and the collaborative piano performances?
Well, it comes and it goes. I mean, you just do it. I mean, it's like with time, like for instance, I do love to learn always new things, but I also learn when saying, well, this year I'm going to be too busy and maybe I can learn one piece. But I like this year I just accepted I will be acting chair for one term, and I'm actually going to offer this program in Vienna, and I've never done Vienna before. So I'm playing a solo recital in the winter, and it will be pieces that I've played before, pieces connected to Vienna. So sometimes you have to make choices. But on the other hand, I don't want to, I mean, especially after COVID, I don't want to say no to anything. And but you know, there's certain, I mean, I ended up marrying a pianist, my wonderful husband, Evan. You might be, if you're hearing a little piano music in the background, he's practicing downstairs. So we understand each other's lifestyle. I should also say we opted not to have children. If I had children, I could never have done any of this. So you make one makes one's choice, you know.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's really hard. I think the administration part is very unrewarding, but you have to do it because, as you said, you are afraid to say no to things, you know. Yeah, but it's not as rewarding as performing and teaching. I think that's
no. And I've said no a number of times, and there came a point where I said I cannot say no. But luckily, it's only 3 months, so I can manage that. But yeah, well, I mean. I consider myself very lucky that I can be a pianist, you know.
Definitely.
We are all very lucky. Yeah.
Definitely. Let's talk about your music, the recordings that you have. You have a most interesting CD, Akamia. And what does that mean?
Kamia, actually, that's the title of a poem that inspired one of these pieces by Molina. To Kamia was a poem that he discovered in a Sunday newspaper. I think it was in the 30s, and it's basically a love poem to a Kamia is like a kind of flower that blooms in the Philippines. It's like a white jasmine of sorts, and it's this poem to this flower that will bloom once and then will be gone, and he's equating it to a love to a woman. It's a very, very sweet piece. This is actually kind of an outlier in the piece among the CDs I've recorded, because every few years I kind of zero in on different repertoire, and so I have a lot of Fauré, I have a lot of Rochberg. Schumann has always been a perennial favorite. But some years ago, a wonderful colleague of mine, a sort of mentor, Bill Summers, who's now retired, he steered me in the direction of this Filipino repertoire, because he was creating a conference. Bill is a phenomenal musicologist, Dr. Summers, who spent many years going to Manila and researching the heritage of the Spanish musicians, the Spanish who taught music to Filipinos. And he created this conference both in the West Coast and here. He was trying to bring together this European heritage. And he basically sent me a stack of manuscripts. There were old yellowing things that you might find in a piano bench, things that are not available anymore. And he threw it at me, basically. It was 2008, and I used to spend a couple of weeks looking through them. I said, oh, they're so interesting. Some of it you think about a little Chopin and a lot of habaneras, a lot of Spanish stuff. Later on, I realized that this is really the vestige of colonialism, and you find it in music from Puerto Rico, from a lot of Mexico, a lot of these places. The Europeans came in with their music, and they were inspiring the natives, who always had very strong innate music in them. So that's how it started. I presented this concert in 2008. I put it aside. I was investigating the possibility of coming out with an edition. I ran into some copyright issues. I kind of forgot about it. But in 2015, I came back. I went to Manila. I played. I have wonderful colleagues there. The two lovely musicologists who wrote the program notes, the liner notes for this CD, Dr. Chua and Dr. Dr. Sylvester, Pat Sylvester and Sandy Chua. They were hosting me. And so I played it in the Philippines and then I recorded it. And I'm very happy that I did, because it's really unabashed, beautiful, celebrating life, celebrating love. And I think it's a heritage that's very little known. And oddly enough, of everything else I have recorded, which I have quite a few CDs out there, but that's that one. I keep getting messages from people saying, where can we get this music? A lot of Filipinos are interested in this heritage.
Yeah. I think we're going to hear one of your music, and I think Andrea is going to put it for us. Yes, there you go. This is La Sampaguita. That's beautiful.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we will have to stop.
I say something about this, because in a way, this is actually the most non-piano piece among them. It's a very significant and meaningful piece to Filipinos, because first of all, it was by a woman composer, and this is from an age where women were not doing that, but it became a very important, it's a song really. And it was one of the hard, I had to include it because it's like, first of all, because it was Dolores Paterno, and she's such a important figure, and it's a very deep felt piece, but it's really a song, and it doesn't work that well for the piano. I had to just try and put myself in the frame of mind for it, but it's like, it's foundational, and so I'm glad you played it, because I think it's Sampaguita, by the way, is also a type of flower, I believe, and so, there's a beautiful poem too.
It's very sectional, and there is a little habanera in there, right, in the left hand, and then it changes the section, the keys also changes. It reminds me a lot of the chorinhos that we have in Brazil, that are also influenced by the Portuguese people.
And it's one of the oldest pieces. I think it's from maybe the middle of maybe even the 1840s. I should remember, but I think it's one of the oldest pieces on that collection. The later, there are some pieces from the 1930s, but this is one of the oldest ones. So it's a little simpler, but it's just so heartfelt.
So when you got the music, you visit the Philippines, or you just stayed and learned the music, and then when it was ready, you went there? Or how was the process of learning the music and recording the music?
That's a great question. I did not visit initially, but I was listening to a lot of salon music at the time, and I was just really trying to kind of loosen up, because it's a very different kind of time, and I don't think my first effort were that great. It's something that when I played it initially in 2008, I played it probably 3 times. I put it aside and I came back to it, and it's like the few times when I had to do like ragtime or jazz, the same thing, going into an idiom that's not my idiom. I was trying to listen to whatever I could find and just trying to relax in a way. Eventually I went to Manila before I recorded, but that was already in the second round. I mean, it's a long trip to make.
Yeah.
But it was a wonderful place to go to, and I've never met a more musical people. Excuse me, I'm just gonna get my handkerchief. I have to have this cold.
All right, that's all right.
So going there, then that was a tremendous boost, and then I recorded only after that. I think I went there in 2015 and I recorded in 18. So the pieces, by the time I recorded them, I felt like I was taking all the time that I needed. But that is something that had to be learned.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is not something that you had to also understand the culture to make it culturally parallel to what they were expecting. Exactly right.
It's this sentimentality, unabashed and beautiful sentimentality, because we're so jaded. And I had to kind of get rid of that and say, yes, it's good to love. It was a very important lesson, I have to say.
Yeah. And it's good to love, to hate, to be angry.
Yeah.
So we have another one here, which is the Nocturne, right? And I think I'm going to ask Andrea to also put that for us to listen to. unfortunately, we're going to have to
Yeah.
stop again. But
Now, this is another very interesting case, because Abelardo was one of the founding composers of the kind of the university and the new school of composition in Manila. And in fact, if you go to the University of the Philippines in Quezon City, you are playing in Abelardo Hall. Abelardo Santiago Molina were some like the very first generation, the important ones. This piece was his graduation piece from I guess his first degree. He was maybe 22 when he wrote it. He was very young, and obviously it owes a lot to Chopin. I mean, it's the same key, C sharp minor, and that I had to fight, because it's like it's like you have to go back to a naive way of thinking, which is wonderful, because again, back to the same issues I said before. But if you are a Filipino person, then you know these names. And so a number of pieces on the CD, like the Sampaguita and this Nocturne, they belong to that. There are pieces by a wonderful Francisco Buencamino. A little later is the second generation, I believe. And his stuff is a lot more virtuosic, rather difficult. He's a great uncle of the pianist Cecily Cad, by the way, I believe.
Yeah.
So there's
yeah, in fact, I talked to her. She was helping us with something a year ago. Cecily Cad is a wonderful pianist, and she's in New York City right now. Yeah.
Right. I think I briefly met her in Marlborough, but so there are some pieces on that CD that are actually a lot more virtuosic, and then the Molina pieces are a little bit more esoteric and more impressionistic with more Debussy-like thing. So what's interesting about the disc is that each one of these composers takes you to a different era and a different part of the musical history of the Philippines. So it's kind of unique. And if you look at what the other things I've done, Rochberg or Fred, in a way, it's so, because I'm used to doing very complex or contemporary stuff, and this was a way of coming back to some roots in a way.
So I heard a lot of like Schumann, as you said, a little Chopin here and there. Do you think it's because they were in Europe studying and then they were influenced, or what do you think?
No, they were taught by the Spanish priests. They were taught by the Spanish. This is all the effects of the Spanish occupation of Manila, of the Philippines. And because of that, this heritage for many years was shunned. The Filipinos did not want to hear a word about it. They wanted to, and justly so, they did not want to hear the music that was affected by the people who came from Europe. They wanted to know what the native music is, what kind of elements that pre-colonialism. But I think there is also a movement now. There's a movement of historians who are saying, well, but we can't really throw it out entirely, because there's some very beautiful things in there as well. If you listen to the disc, you see and I think I might have mentioned it in my opening that there is a very distinct Filipino spirit there if you start listening to it. Because yes, I mean they knew the Chopin nocturnes, not from having gone there, but from having studied them. I mean, people would. There was a great flux of people coming to Manila to play, so they would have met European musicians. But as far as I know, none of these composers traveled to Europe to study.
I see.
But so now there is a movement of people who are coming back to recognize this music. But it was a contentious topic in musicological circles in the Philippines.
Oh, wonderful. So you also mentioned that you have CDs for hands with your husband, right? And I saw some Fauré in there, and so that's another literature, and you are very versatile. I see that you go from contemporary to romantic. There's some Chopin too that I saw, some Debussy of your recordings. Do you think it is necessary to have chamber music in education, or for hands duets and stuff like that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there are two points that you're bringing up, which I want to talk about, both of them. Yes, to the latter one, absolutely. In a way, I think I found my voice as a chamber musician before I found it as a soloist, because I've always liked making music with other people, and because I was a decent sight reader, I could do it without a huge investment. And I always did that. I mean, so my earliest best recollections are doing a lot of chamber music. And I think that's very important because you have to be able to be flexible, and you have to there is a certain kind of musical communication that bypasses words. In fact, as the older I get, the less I talk when I do chamber music. I used to talk a lot and justify this and justify that. And I said, no, it's either going to work or it's not going to work. If it's not going to work, all the talking in the world is not going to help. And if it is going to work, you don't need to talk about it. But anyway, I've always loved chamber music. And then playing with that's a very funny topic about my husband, because my husband was also a student of Sherman. And when we met, we were joking. He said he never thought he would get together with an Israeli. And I said I never thought I would get together with another pianist. But we waited 10 years before we started playing together, for good reason, because you have to kind of keep your boundaries. But playing piano ensemble is one of the cruelest chamber music propositions, because there is no hiding the point of attack. If you're playing with a violinist, even with a wind player, there is a way of the piano is precise, but the other instrument, with two pianists, if you're not together, you can hear it. So it's a very good thing to do, because you have to educate yourself to leave a certain percentage of your mind free to try and figure out what the other person is doing and work with that. So, but it takes a certain kind of personality. I have also met people who are phenomenal soloists and are horrible chamber musicians because they cannot listen to anybody else.
That's correct. That's correct. And there are some that are wonderful chamber musicians but cannot do solo either. So it's very hard. One thing that I've noticed is rarely, but it has happened maybe once or twice with me, is you are accompanying somebody that you have nothing in common, even musically. You don't have anything. You think different, and you're trying to understand the other person's ideas, and all of a sudden it's like this, but you have to make music together. Have you experienced that?
Unfortunately, yes, a few times, and you make the best of it, because I mean, I believe in being professional, and that also extends to the instrument that we play, because as pianists we have to play whatever instrument is put in front of us, and boy, some of those are pretty dogs like. I mean, no, I don't want to insult dogs. I love dogs. Some of them should not be. But in any case, I always think I need to bring the best out of every situation. So if I find myself in that situation, and I do it to the best of my ability, and I make a little mental note not to say yes the next time, basically, because it hurts, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And it's difficult. It's really difficult to make music. You ended up just playing, you know. Yeah. So we're going to change a little bit, and we're going to talk about music nowadays. We are in a generation of digital. Everything is digital. Even ourselves, we were talking a little bit about that before, that everything is in your click. And sometimes the click works and sometimes the click does not work.
right.
What has changed in music, and what has changed? Two things. What has changed also in teaching with the digital world? Do you think it has changed a lot, the way we see music?
It's such a big question. It's very hard to just address it in such a kind of a big chunk like this. I'm noticing, for instance, I'm thinking about the group I took to London with me this year, as opposed to groups I've taken in previous years. With each successive group, I see more of a spilling between genres. Like many of the kids I took were doing a little bit of classical, but they were also doing something else, and they were trying to mix and match and things like that. And I think that on the same wavelengths, on the same idea that like all of these devices, I'm using an iPad, by the way, and I was using it for teaching too. All of these devices have wreaked havoc on our thought process. We're thinking in shorter terms. We're thinking a movement instead of the piece. I have a hard time when students come to me and say, I played the first movement of this sonata and the second movement of that sonata. And I say, are you really going to read just the first 5 chapters of War and Peace? Or are you going to... It boggles my mind. I have to say that I'm rebelling against that tendency, because I think it's bad. I'm also rebelling against it in myself. I'm trying to go back to reading books rather than... So I think on some level, it's not necessarily the fact that things are digital, but the fact that everything is available at our fingertips. I think it damaged our thought process, frankly. That's maybe that will mark me as an alte Kacker, if you know that German word. Yeah, it's like an old fart, I'm sorry about that, because I think maybe we're gaining what the catchword of crossover and multi this and multi that, but we're losing depth, we're losing meaning, I'm afraid. Otherwise, on the other hand, on the good side, when the pandemic hit, and I was actually on the edge of going to London for another program in 2020, and 2 weeks before departure, the whole thing was canceled. We had tickets for 40 events. We had an apartment, airplane. I was ready to be an external non-pianist, and instead I lived in this room, basically. I was very grateful to be able to teach. I mean, I ended up not Zooming it. I was using actually... oh, now suddenly the word escaped me. I was using one of those I was Skyping because I did not like the sound on Zoom. But I felt so grateful to be able to sit there with my students, and each one of them had a different piano, and I was hearing the dog barking and the mother cooking and the teacher and the brother playing the flute and people coming and going. But it gave us some sort of a hold on sanity. I was very grateful for that. I mean, yes, I also complained about certain things that weren't working, but I mean, I'm thinking in 1918, they didn't have that option. I mean, when the flu pandemic, I mean, so what we gained from this, there's certain things that we should hold on to simply because I firmly believe, yes, it's not the best, and there's certain sound things that cannot happen. But so talk about the structure, don't talk about the sound. I mean, I cannot see how you're producing your sound, but I can talk about other things. I think you have to find the silver lining.
Yeah.
So I bemoan the loss of depth, and that I worry about that a little bit. But other than that, I'm saying if you can use it, why not?
Yeah, I agree with you. Even myself, I can tell the difference in concentration. I'm very short span now. When I used to concentrate for 4 hours, it wasn't a big deal. But at the same time, I think now, look at us. We are talking, and you are in the north, and I'm in the south, and we have somebody in Brazil, somebody in Portugal.
Amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. I think we have to use the good of every bed and select. So what is the advice? And that's something that I always ask my the people that I interview, the musicians. What advice would you give to a young musician that is just in their teens and trying to become a musician, whatever musician, composer, flautist, pianist? What is your best advice for that young musician?
I think the best advice is really to follow the heart, is to follow your passion. I mean, and I'm remembering myself, I was voracious. I went to every concert I could. In those days, I was running around to hear the Israeli Philharmonic, and we would sneak in and get free tickets, and we would go to listen to anything we could. That's the one thing. I mean, one should get, and that's why we send our students to London, because the thinking is, Dartmouth is in a very small place in New Hampshire, Hanover. It's 2 hours from Boston and 5 hours from New York. The Hopkins Center is bringing some art, but there's very little. And the idea is to expose them to amazing and first-class music. And I was seeing their eyes pop from all the concerts we were hearing in London. I mean, they got enough inspiration for a lifetime. And that I already see that with some of my graduates of previous programs who became professional musicians. Not that many people become professional musicians from Dartmouth, but some of the people who go on this program become. So we need to get this enthusiasm going, and we need to expose them. That's the first thing. But the second thing is they need to, I mean, at least in my book, there is no gain without a lot of pain. They have to be ready to work, because it's a form of slavery, especially if one is trying to be an instrumentalist of any sort. You cannot do it by just being brilliant. You have to, it's like being an athlete. You have to learn certain things about the instrument, about how you approach the instrument, and depending on what you want to do. I mean, if you want to do just improvisation or something that doesn't require this kind of technique, then you're fine. But if you're trying to play Rachmaninoff, Ravel, and Shostakovich or something, then you have to build a technique. So one of my Shebok was the amazing teacher to talk about understanding the body, and it takes a lot of years to do that, and it is a form of slavery. And I think the kids these days, I think they have to be fired up in order to be able to commit themselves to this kind of work. It's not for everybody. So I had this discussion because I had a little event for Dartmouth Development, and I met the parents, London parents of Dartmouth students, and they were asking me the same question, like, what do we do to a youngster who shows promise and is interested in it? And encourage their passion, but also prepare them for a lot of hard work. And then one thing I say, if my students ask me, I said, if there's anything else you can do that will make you happy, do the other thing and keep the music. Music will always be with you, because it's a hard life. But if that's the only thing that will make you happy, then go for it and you'll find a way. I mean, if I had looked at my life now when I was in my teens, I don't know what I would have thought. I probably would have thought, she doesn't have much of a career. And now I think I'm very, very lucky. So does that give you?
Yes,
something?
it does answer. Yeah. And I think also what you were talking about, the hard life, is pretty much dedication in discipline. I think we have to have the discipline of practicing. Do you think that the basic technique has to be learned every day?
What do you mean?
I mean, I'm talking about the scales and arpeggios and stuff like that.
Yeah. So luckily I was not taught dogmatically, and what I ended up doing, and I have played in various periods of my life. I mean, there were a few years when I was doing like the Opus 39 and Tout Tableau Rachmaninoff, or I was doing Ravel, Gaspar. You do the technique on the piece. And the piece it has to kind of come out of the piece. But of course, I paid my dues playing etudes and things like that. But for me, technique was a means to an end. So I do not give my students a regimen of scales and things like that. But if they need to be challenged, we go to, the Chopin etudes are always a go-to, with the understanding that you never finish learning them.
Yeah,
I have never finished learning them. I don't like, I'm not dogmatic. So I think you have to when you have a problem, you find a solution for it. Mm-hmm. One piece of advice that I've found as I get older and I try to give to my students is that one of the problems of students is that you get scared of a passage, and then you sort of you close your eyes and you try to do the whole thing. And the thing is, you have to chop it up. You have to compartmentalize it, and you have to go to the first step and then to the next step and then to the next step. It has to be a logical sequence. It's a problem solving. And I think maybe if we present it as a problem solving situation where you have a particular thing that you have to work, and you also have to understand where it fits in the music. Sometimes the things that give us the most problems are the things that are the least important in the flow of the piece. You can fake them and let me hear the whole line of the piece instead of zeroing on them, playing them so badly that I will hear that you're playing them badly, and then the rest of the piece falls into pieces. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. But the zooming in, and that's what I was talking about, to have that regimen. This is the problem. I'm going to solve the problem instead of just playing through. And that's one thing that we find sometimes now in young musicians is the lack of patience in solving the problems that we have in the music. Well, it's been wonderful talking to you, and tell me a little bit more about the study abroad program that you guys have in Dartmouth. Is that something that it's only for the students in your department, or is this something open to others, other musicians as well?
Well, because we are a liberal arts college, many of the students who would go on this program are not necessarily music majors, but they have to be musicians, because one of the 3 classes is a set of individual lessons with a London musician. So it can be instrumentalists or vocalists, but I also this year I had a woman who was doing digital composition. I had also somebody who pursued ethnomusicology. But they have to, it's a music. Dartmouth has many of these programs, and it gives them, the students, an opportunity for one term to focus only on one subject. And in our case, the subject is music, because as you know, I mean, your school is also a liberal arts university, right?
Yeah, yes and no. Yes, we have the liberal arts degree, but we also have the education degree. Yeah.
Okay, so that's a little different. I only have undergraduates, and as I said, you don't have to be a music major to take instrument lessons and to take theory. I require them to take one thing of theory, one thing of history, and they have to have ongoing set of lessons so that when they go to London, they basically continue that. So musicians have to go, but they're not necessarily majors.
And while they are there, they have their lessons, and at the same time, you also take them at night to see the concerts and broaden their experience.
So the Dartmouth curriculum is such that we have 3 courses normally per term. In my course, that's what we call an experiential course. Then yes, in the course of that segment of study, I was going with them to all of these concerts, and then they had to make presentations. Each one of them presented on one of the major pieces, because we were seeing so much that there was no way of being properly introduced in a way. They were also writing an ongoing concert blog, and I also made them play chamber music with each other as part of that course. So it was really intense. But then they were taking a second course that was just a pure academic course, the history of music in England, and it was taught by Dr. Michelle Meinhardt, who's a wonderful, actually an American who's now a resident in the UK. She teaches at Trinity Laban, and that was more academic. And then each one of them was going off to lessons with people who were like the cello instructor was the principal cello of the BBC orchestra. Every one of the musicians, we had, for a group of 14 students, we had 12 teachers, because only 2 of them had 2 students each. So they actually ended up running out of time. I mean, it was, and meanwhile they're trying to see London, and they had a break to go to Europe. So it was very intense. And I'm pretty sure I got my cold because I got back about a week ago, and I was running around like a mad woman. And finally I came home and I got a cold because my body's saying, hold on.
You can relax now.
Yeah, and it was wonderful, and especially post-COVID. I mean, our first concert was a Baroque concert, the amazing violinist Rachel Podger at Wigmore Hall, and people cried because it was like the first time for many of them, it was like the first live concert they went to after the pandemic. Yeah. This is a generation I had sophomores and juniors, so it means that they already came to college within this period of time. So that was a very moving experience.
That's wonderful. Well, I have to thank you for this wonderful interview and for accepting being part of this program. And it is going to be available in YouTube for further, whoever wants to watch this, or if you want to watch yourself, it's going to be in YouTube for a while. And wonderful. I would like to thank you once more for accepting and for this wonderful time that we learned so much about music that we didn't know about. So thank you very much. And thank you so much, Andrea, for the invitation.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you. That's a lovely conversation. Great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you both. It was a pleasure.
I hope to see you in my city, Goiânia, and then we can go to the capital, Brasilia.
That sounds fantastic. So we'll be in touch. And meanwhile, here's to music, and here's to a good summer, and good luck with your travels, Rose.
Please stay backstage until we finish the program. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Rose and Sally. Thank you. Muito obrigada pela presença. Esse é um programa da Escola de Música e Artes Cênicas com a Reitoria Digital da Universidade Federal de Goiás, a Mississippi State Universrity e a Universidade del Atlántico. Temos o apoio da Fundação para a Ciência e Tecnologia de Portugal, do Centro de Estudos de Sociologia e Estética Musical da Universidade Nova de Lisboa, do Centro de Estudos Brasileiros, da Rádio Universitária e da Rádio Brasil Central FM. Muito obrigada a todos vocês pela presença e até a próxima semana.